Hey, what's going on, everybody? Good evening, and thanks for uh, joining the show if you're watching this live. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy this one. I'm going to be doing kind of a grab bag of different things. There's a few smaller videos that were out there that I wanted to kind of, they had a few things going on that I wanted to take a look at. One features Darth Dawkins, one features VEKL, and the other one features Darth Dawkins and JRobin. Mostly JRobin, I think. So yeah, I'm trying to figure out which one to start with. I think I'm going to start with the Darth Dawkins one right up front because it's like a 13-minute clip, but the conversation is between him and a user named London87. The video is like round 3 of their discussion. There's 2 other ones on there, and they're in Discord somewhere. I don't know how recent some of this stuff is because I'm picking these up from Scott Smith 75 and Clubhouse Debates. So I'm not totally sure when these happened, but I'm thinking they're more or less kind of recent. But this one that I'm going to be showing here is kind of informative because it starts off with right off. It's in fact it's kind of abrupt when it starts up. Darth lays out a description of what he wants from people, kind of like what he believes can and can't be done by any of the skeptics that he's talking to. And so it's an interesting one because it's probably the most, it's still not clearly communicated, um, but it's worth pointing out. And then after that, they begin to have a conversation. I might not, I probably won't finish it up. They kind of get stuck in a loop, as Darth tends to with people, and the rest of it kind of devolves from there. And if you want to watch the rest of it, I'd recommend, I've got the links in the description. I'd recommend going over to Scott Smith's YouTube channel to watch the rest of it. But I'm going to watch a little bit of it, but mostly that first part. And then we'll move on to the rest of them. So, but thanks everybody for coming. And as usual, appreciate any comments going on in the live comments. Any issues with playback, sound, all that kind of stuff. That just give a yell. All right, I'm going to play this one, and this one starts off abruptly, so I might play this a couple of times. But here he goes.
That is a logical incoherency because in order for you to verbalize putative facts, right, they are going to be derivative and dependent on your model of reality being actual. All right. So the intelligibility of those putative facts is derivative and dependent on your model of reality being actual.
So he just kind of repeats that twice. But if you catch what he's saying there, it's actually kind of that sort of sums up his entire approach. And if he ever asks me what my biggest problem with his approach to apologetics is, it used to just be that goofy question, how do you reference a fact without referencing the necessity of referencing God? Yeah, this is it. This is probably my number one complaint because this is transparently, I mean, obviously, a conflation of the map for the place, for the location. I'm going to wind it back just a couple more seconds and we'll play it again.
Putative facts. Because in order for you to verbalize putative facts.
So in order for you to say something factual, right, in order to actually assert a fact about the world around you,
right, they are going to be derivative and dependent on your model of reality being actual.
So those facts are derived and they're dependent upon your model of reality being actual. That is horseshit. Your model of reality is not an actual thing. That's just your theory of stuff. Reality would be the actual part, and the things that you're asserting would reference reality. If your model of reality can in fact not conform to actual reality. So the fact that your facts have to conform to your worldview, which is actual, is just a very long-winded way for Darth. Basically, Darth is an infallibilist, and a monist. You can't say anything about a proposition being true unless it's actually the case. You can't know anything. You can't make that knowledge claim. That seems to be where he's going with this, and this is transparently what it is. Although I think in previous videos and with other people, he has denied that stance when challenged. So I'm not really sure why he. I'm not really sure how he would. This right here was a great clip. Just this little bit, because that lays out, I think, everything that's wrong with him. And somebody could uh, and please do correct me if I'm getting the wrong thing. But that's the impression that I'm getting from this. So, and if it's not infallibilism or if it's something else, please let me know. I'm going to play this a little bit more because he kind of goes in a little bit deeper on this, not too much.
All right. So the intelligibility of those putative facts is derivative and dependent on your model of reality being actual. So when you speak from worldview B and you put worldview K on the table as an alternative, that is a logical contradiction to and from the worldview B that you are speaking from, because worldview B is a contradiction to worldview K. Do you understand that?
Now, for any of you who've listened to him before, maybe you've heard him explain this a little bit. I've never heard him quite lay it out this poorly, but I'm going to play it again.
Worldview B, K, speak from world on your model of reality being actual.
Okay, here we go.
So when you speak from worldview B,
so if you're speaking from worldview B, which I don't know if that's the hypothetical worldview or your actual worldview,
and you put worldview K on the table as an alternative, that is a logical contradiction.
Why? So he's assuming two things. This is sloppy. If you're speaking from worldview B and you're talking about another worldview K, it sounds like what he's saying is entertaining hypotheticals is ultimately fallacious, or automatically fallacious. I don't understand where he's coming from this. Now, if what he means by this is like, well, if you're speaking from this worldview, your own worldview, and then you're trying to entertain this other worldview that's not your own, that's fallacious. But he just says, if you're speaking from worldview B and you're going to talk about worldview K, well, you can't be in another worldview. According to Darth, there's just one worldview. I mean, according to what Darth says, everybody's got their own worldview, and everybody's worldview is incoherent except the Christian one, which just happens to be his. But he doesn't understand the entailment of his own precept. There is only one worldview possible, and we're all inside it. This is where he gets really confused about this. So in his glee at thinking that his precept gives him the ability to kind of like metaphysically choke slam somebody for thinking they have another worldview, even though the way he's using worldview doesn't match anybody's definitions. He's completely forsaken what precept's supposed to be about. So this is a really strange approach to this. But like my initial reaction when I'm like, so he's basically, when it comes to worldviews, entertaining a hypothetical worldview is out of the question as far as Darth's concerned. So I find that odd.
To and from the worldview B that you are speaking from, because worldview B is a contradiction to worldview K. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Therefore, it is a logically incoherent to speak from one specific worldview and its ultimacy and propose an alternative worldview, because the moment you do, it contradicts the worldview that you're speaking from that is either explicitly or implicitly actual. Okay?
And that does not make any sense. You can entertain the notion of an alternate reality for the purpose of making an argument or entertaining propositions. I really don't understand what he's talking about here. This is a ridiculously silly burden to place on anyone. And if he understood, I think if he understood what this means within the perspective of his own precept, he wouldn't be doing this. But here he is. And I didn't understand why London 87 was like, yeah, I understand the fallacy. Like I if he's being 100% honest, I don't understand that there's any fallacy at all going on there. Being able to entertain another worldview, for the sake of argument, is exactly what a Christian's usually inviting you to do. Like, here's the worldview. Here, my worldview is that the Christian worldview is the only one that's sane, and that there's a God, and he exists, and he definitely exists, and there's no denying that. Now, prove me wrong. I mean, you can, maybe that person is right. Maybe maybe God does exist, and it is the Christian God. But that doesn't change the fact that the Christian can't do anything except assert it. They don't really have any proof for it, or at least they don't have good evidence for it. So now this situation is going to get a little weirder. So London has kind of like, yeah, okay, and Darth's going to twist this up a little bit more.
Okay, so what I've just explained to you is what has been called the fallacy of pluralism. It is an absolute fallacy. Now, most people
this makes no sense. My understanding of pluralism and whatever the hell he's talking about are very different, but we'll see. He just calls it the fallacy of pluralism and says it's an absolute fallacy.
Like yourself are simply not aware of this fallacy.
That's because pluralism isn't a fallacy unless you're approaching pluralism from from a relatively narrow theological perspective. It's a theological claim that pluralism is fallacious. This is not coming from something philosophical. I'm sure Ding Dong would say that it has something to do with like, well, it's biblical and therefore it's part of absolute truth or whatever. There's nothing about any of the definitions of pluralism that I've seen that has anything to do with fallacies, right? Pluralism is something like, things like monism and these other kinds of things that get dealt with. It can be kind of controversial and they can be contested, but it's not fallacious. Not only that, but the other side of this kind of thing, this actually is kind of revealing something, right? So the other guy cannot talk from worldview B. He's in worldview B. I'm assuming that Darth Dawkins is worldview A. And he's saying, no, you can't talk about worldview K, my man, from worldview B, because that's the fallacy of pluralism. Darth can't entertain worldview B from the skeptic, as he is in worldview A, because that is the fallacy of pluralism, according to him. So he's just sort of self-destructed here. This makes absolutely no sense at this point, why he's approaching this London guy this way. He's just detonated his own argument. But it'll go on a little bit longer.
So you cannot put on the table, and when you did put on the table an alternative worldview that is not your worldview to my worldview, that is a logical contradiction. So now I've explained it so that a fifth grader can understand it. Do you understand your fallacy?
I understand what the fallacy is, and as I've explained,
did you commit it?
Applicable.
So London is saying he understands what the fallacy is, which, I mean, if he's being very generous, that's slightly generous. Excuse me. He might be being a little bit disingenuous to keep the conversation running, because there really is no fallacy here. And now, as soon as like, oh, okay, you understand the fallacy. Now, are you willing to admit that that you committed it? Darth just did. Darth committed the fantasy. If he is even beginning to entertain that London 87 has a worldview B, quote unquote, and Darth's worldview is presumably worldview A, the biblical Christian one that is of course correct, Darth is committing implicitly this quote unquote fallacy of pluralism that he's now accusing London 87 of.
It is not applicable in this situation.
Did you offer as an alternative potential actual another model of reality?
There is nothing wrong with.
Okay, so now he's using language that would make it indicate that he's capable of identifying something categorically different than an actual, a potential actual. Do you mean a hypothetical, Darth?
Posing
I didn't ask you whether it was wrong. I said, did you put on the table another model of reality that is not your own as a potential actual?
It's called entertaining a hypothetical. please get better books on philosophy.
It did.
Well, when my own position is one of being an agnostic atheist. Right?
You're not addressing my question.
Darth, can you stop interrupting him,
Listen,
please?
yeah, don't interrupt, please. Now,
Answer my question.
Can you stop him?
I always love how when as soon like it's like he suffers from an obstinate defiant disorder, right? Like he's just kind of sophisticated, and so he can find ways to kind of bend the rules. So as soon as somebody tells him stop interrupting, he almost immediately responds. Nearly every time with answer my question or stop dodging. Right? He immediately shifts it back to the other person. Oh, I'm not interrupting. They're not answering me. Oh, I'm not interrupting. They're dodging. Oh, I'm not interrupting. They're a scumbag. Right? Like it immediately, like at this point, the narcissism is just it's all narcissism all the time with him.
Interrupting him, please. It's really annoying.
My position is on the metaphysical answer to the question: does a God exist? There is an answer, yes or no, and I don't know that answer. I'm an agnostic on the absolute level, on the metaphysical level. I don't know the absolute.
You're not answering my question.
But no, don't interrupt, please. Epistemologically, I see no good reason. No. I see no good reason to accept as true that God exists. Now, that position is totally compatible with a naturalistic pantheism. Although I don't declare myself as a naturalistic pantheist, the position of being agnostic, as to say I don't know.
This has nothing to do with my question that I posed to you.
It has nothing to do, and it's contradicting what he said earlier.
No.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should be pointing out any contradictions London 87 might be making. Darth has already contradicted himself at least once. And he's laid out something that anybody else in here, even people who are kind of friendly with Darth, should be smart enough that should be catching on to the fact that, one, he stepped in it pretty big here with the whole fallacy of pluralism claim. That's not real. You can just Google it. That's not real. Darth is making that shit up. Now, if he's pulling that from some pamphlet from some minister or some apologist or whatever, then they made that shit up, and he's cribbing it, and he really shouldn't be. Which means he read it and didn't Google it to verify whether or not it's actually an accepted thing. Says, oh, biblically, I'll accept that. I can use that, yeah, that'll work for when I'm getting yelly with the atheists.
Listen, dude.
It does have something to do.
No, it doesn't. I said, do you understand that you committed a fallacy?
If we're comparing worldviews, and my worldview is one that lacks knowledge, as an agnostic who lacks knowledge, and you are one who's claiming certain knowledge, then it's therefore perfectly acceptable for me to present alternative points of view, which would demonstrate that your conclusions are not reliable.
You're still not getting this. Either you do get it, and you're being dishonest, or you truly do not get it. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple of simple, non-loaded questions. Did you propose another worldview as an alternative to the Christian worldview that was not your own?
If I'm an agnostic atheist, then what?
What? He's just admitted it. Did you propose an alternative worldview to the Christian worldview other than the one that you have? Darth, if you think that he has one other than the one that he's trying to present, this worldview K that you are just slapping down, the fact that you are acknowledging that he has worldview B while you have worldview A means you're a pluralist. There's more than one worldview possible, right? Come on, buddy. What the hell's that about?
Why can I not?
Sir,
Darth, can you allow him to finish the answer to your question, please? Darth, please stop interrupting him.
Did you propose another worldview?
Darth, please stop. Can you please allow him to finish his full answer? I'm a moderator. Please, can you allow him to finish the full answer before
he's not answering the question.
You interject?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if he's not answering the question, let him finish. Wait. Can you stop talking?
I said it 4 times.
Yes. Wait. If he does not answering the
See, as soon as you please let him answer the question. Well, I've asked it 4 times. Can you stop arguing? Can you stop over talking him? Answer my question. Or he's dodging.
Question. Wait for him to not answer the question, then respond. Okay. Thank you. London, continue.
Thank you. And as I've pointed out, if my position is one of being an agnostic, we're talking about metaphysics here at the moment. We're talking about what's absolutely true. We're talking about certainty, right? We're talking about the absolute truths of existence and so on. And if I'm an agnostic when it comes to those things, then I don't have a position. Then if you're the one taking a positive position as to make the claim that you have some claims to certain knowledge, then it's well within my rights to produce some variety of alternatives that I don't necessarily hold as a position that I hold myself. I mean, I could posit polytheism.
You're not answering my question. You haven't answered. You haven't addressed my question at all.
That's because the main question that he asked, the one that he keeps going back to, is, do you admit that you committed this fallacy? One, he didn't commit that fallacy because that fallacy doesn't exist. And two, more importantly, that's a fucking loaded question, right? Answering like, do you admit that you committed this fallacy? No. Oh, so you don't admit it? Well, I mean, yes. Oh, so you admit that you did it. That's the fallacy. Like, I don't think Darth can help himself. Like, he's been in interrogator mode for so long, and I think he derives so much of his knowledge base from poorly written Christian tracts that he can't actually even see through loaded questions and bullshit statements. And I mean, so much of this is just hackneyed marketing crap from apologists and God botherers and weirdos. He's broken. Like, this is watching somebody who probably had like a spark of intelligence long ago, but due to some crippling mental health issues, a lack of I don't know, maybe a lack of a loving environment as a kid, and then you couple that with good old fashioned American Christianity, he's a wreck. But he sure sounds confident in the bullshit that's rolling out of his face.
Okay, London, you've had fair time. London, you've had fair time to respond. Allow Darth to deconstruct what you've said and why you're not answering his question.
I'll repeat the question, and it's
so that guy, whoever he was, is like, okay, allow Darth to deconstruct what you just said, and Darth is going back to his question.
Obvious to everyone in the room that you're running the clock out by just.
And now he's going to say that this guy is engaging in tactics that he's not engaging in because the guy's desperately trying to get a point across, and Darth's not paying attention to him. So yeah, the rest of the video kind of goes that way, and then it just gets even weirder. So that's pretty much it for that. Watch the rest of it if you've got the stomach for it. The rest of it just kind of repeats from there on. So, but the real juicy stuff was kind of right up front. So thanks to Scott Smith for this particular video. I like that clip. I hope that stays up. And refer back to that one if especially when Darth starts getting extra worked up about his worldview body double claims. Here he was making a claim that pluralism is a fallacy, and so is entertaining a hypothetical. Dingbat. So we'll stop that one. And the next one we're going to move on to. This one is easy. We'll move right on into this one. This one's fairly quick. This one's not Darth Dawkins. Take a little break from Darth. We're going to move right on to this was a clubhouse room. And VEKL was in there. And for those of you who know, I'm not a big fan of VEKL. But he had a conversation with Danny. And Danny is pretty shrewd when it comes to philosophy. Some of you may remember I had a video months and months ago, a long one. Tom Rabbit and Danny and I did a review of Darth. And I haven't talked to Danny in quite a while, but I've seen him around a couple of times. So anyway, this video popped up. And so VEKL was hosting this one. This looks like it was on his Clubhouse channel. Danny jumps in there, and Danny starts quizzing VEKL on kind of a logical problem of evil. Well, sort of. It's a little bit more common sense language than that. So here we go.
You said it sounds horrible is because you are of the natural mind. And these things that I'm talking about require spiritual discernment, not natural or temporal discernment. And
I have a question. Earlier you said everything has a purpose. Do you literally mean everything, every event?
Yeah. Yeah, everything has a purpose. Yeah, God has a purpose for everything that he permits or decrees. Yeah.
All right. So if every event has a purpose, or there's a purpose to every event should happen, right?
Yeah, I believe that.
So if no event shouldn't happen, that means you just reject evil. There's no evil.
Who says no event shouldn't happen?
Because you're saying that if every event should happen, then that means it's going to be false that any event shouldn't happen.
I don't know what you mean by any event shouldn't happen. If we're talking about God, everything happens under his watch. He's either allowing it or he's permitting it, or he's decreeing it to occur.
No, but you said every event.
Yeah, this almost Shatterhouse. This conversation gets really loopy. It almost turns into like a who's on first kind of thing. And really, the biggest thing. This is a little bit of a spoiler, but generally, if you use a double negative in a sentence, you will confuse the shit out of VEKL. I'm not saying that to be insulting. I'm saying that because that is actually seems to be the case, and you will see it here. It's happened. I've seen it happen before in other cases.
Should happen, right? You know that entailment. You did say that.
No, I didn't say every event should happen. I didn't say that.
Yes, he did. So he's already lost it. We're a minute and 15 seconds in, and he's already lost track of what his stance is. Danny already asked him. He's like, because he made the claim, all events happen for God's purpose, and he's like, okay, do you believe that? And he's like, so nothing shouldn't happen. Everything that happens should happen. And VEKL answered, yes, I believe that. In fact, there was quite a bit of confidence in his voice. Like he was proud to answer in the affirmative. And now he's saying he didn't say that. No, technically he's right. He didn't say that, but he affirmed that position.
You said that every event has a purpose, right? And then I asked you, that means that every event should happen, and then you said yes.
I said every event that God either allows or decrees has an ultimate purpose to it.
But every event is one that God allows or decrees by definition. This is where VEKL starts getting sneaky, and he's not good at it. Every event in VEKL's theology it fits into one of those two categories. It's either decreed by God or it is allowed by God. There isn't a third category of anything. So now he's trying to make this distinction to Danny, like, oh yeah, well, hang on, I didn't say not everything, just everything that God either allows or decrees. That's everything, VEKL. That's everything from that particular Christian point of view.
All right. So do you agree that every event has a purpose? Do you think that entails every event should happen?
In the mind of God, sure. He's obviously either.
All right, in the mind of God, and that's the only sense of should I'm using. I'm not using any other sense of should. In the mind of God, everything should happen. So in the mind of God, there are no events that should not have happened, which means that in the mind of God, there's no evil.
Well, I'm not a fatalist, so as I had the discussion with CJ last week, I think the Bible leaves tons of room for humans to apply things such as anthropomorphisms and metaphors with regards to not only God's nature, but also his actions as well.
So what was the anthropomorphism VEKL was applying when he said all things happen for his purpose, for God's purpose? Or I'm not getting that verbatim, but that's basically what everything happens for a reason, and that reason is that whatever God wants to happen. Nothing's happening that God either doesn't allow or doesn't decree in some way. So
I don't have a problem with there being some sort of paradoxical meaning to his behavior or his.
So VEKL believes in a God for bad evidence. But I don't. He's saying now he doesn't have a problem with I don't have a problem with this God having paradoxical qualities. We know that. We know Christians don't have a problem with it. But so many Christians come onto venues like Clubhouse and stuff and tell skeptics that they're the rational ones. They've made the realistic conclusion. They're the ones in the know. They've got the good sense to know that everything has to start from God. Danny has barely begun to push on this guy. He's basically tapped VEKL on the shoulder, like, hang on a second. And VEKL is already like collapsing over, like, no, it's not everything, or everything. Well, no, just what he decrees. No, not that. Just what he permits. This is bullshit. VEKL is just already starting to tap dance. It's getting embarrassing.
Nature. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I'm not so sure what how that applies here. If you think that every event has a purpose, and if that entails that every event should happen, if every event shouldn't happen, that entails that no event shouldn't happen in the mind of God. And if that's true, that means there's no event that's evil, and that's just to deny evil.
Well, I would say if all things happen under God's watch and He's omnipotent, omniscient, therefore He has the ability to stop certain events from happening. So therefore, you would say it logically only concludes that He's the one actually.
No, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about the proposition: is there any evil? From God's perspective, is there any evil? Yes or no?
Is there evil? Yeah. There's.
Okay, so that means evil is that which should not happen, right?
So this is interesting because Danny's really only kind of going back and forth between these two definitions. He's holding VEKL to what VEKL's first claim was, that things, all events happen for God's purpose. That's the first clincher right there. And then he's sort of sticking him with this notion that evil would have to be something that goes against what we think should happen, which is, I think that's part of evil, but it's a hell of a good angle to take. All right. You wouldn't say that someone being, I was attacked wasn't something that you thought should have happened. People shouldn't be attacking people, but when people do attack one another, we're like, oh, that's an evil thing to do. It's not tough. It's keeping the language fairly simple. So Danny's just like, oh, okay. So if everything happens, if every event that happens because God wants it, then nothing happened that should not have happened, which means by definition, no evil occurred, because ultimately whatever that you could only try to make the argument that it was evil in the moment or something like that. Now there's lots of different ways that VEKL can get out of this, lots of them. He takes none of them. He just keeps trying to strangle the definitions out of this kind of stuff. And then I don't know how long we have to go, but then I think he starts pretending that Danny doesn't understand him, or Danny doesn't understand what's going on. In fact, I think he does. I think he starts going after him and saying that Danny has a mind of flesh or something like that, and like he can't perceive these things spiritually. Yeah.
That which should not happen. I don't know
if something's evil, it shouldn't happen. I think rape is evil, which means I don't think it should happen.
I don't know if I would necessarily define it that way, to be honest with you. I mean, what kind of evil are you talking about? You talking about moral evil or natural?
Doesn't matter.
Are you talking about moral evil or natural evil? That's an interesting question. I could have kept him tied up with this for hours. What's the difference? If all events happen for God's purpose and nothing that's happened is anything that we should consider something that shouldn't have happened, then there's no such thing as natural or moral evil from the perspective of that God. Everything happened the way He wanted it to happen. So if someone commits genocide, that's God ultimately needed that to happen, so it should have happened. If an earthquake happens or a tsunami hits and floods a city, that should have happened. Was it unfortunate? Did a lot of people die? Yep. But it ultimately happened. All these things happen because God wants them to happen. That was VEKL's first claim.
Right.
Okay.
The point is that if X is evil, it shouldn't happen. That's a standard definition. Otherwise, you can just tell me what you mean by evil.
Well, let's say, for example, rape. God obviously condemns that. So that's something that we humans shouldn't advocate or practice.
Yeah, I'm just asking you what you mean by evil.
God allows it to occur.
Yeah, I'm just asking you what you mean by evil now, because you're saying that evil, well, there could be a possibility where it's evil, but it should happen, and that's just a contradiction the way I use the terms. So you must be using the terms differently.
No, well, when I say evil, I'm talking about I'm looking based on what the way the Bible uses the word evil. It uses it in two ways. So we're saying that there's a moral evil, which is, iniquity, transgression of the law, any type of bad thing like, rape, stealing, lying, that kind of thing. And then you got the natural law, the other way that the word ra in Hebrew is used, which is in reference to calamity, like a storm, an earthquake.
Actually, I don't think the Bible makes a distinction between natural and moral evil. That's more of a philosophical distinction. I'd like to know where VEKL is getting the idea that somewhere in the Old Testament they understood this, or in ancient. Now, maybe they did. Maybe in ancient Israelite society and other societies. I mean, we do think of things like that, right? If I drive my car, if I intentionally drive my car over something to damage it or to kill something, then I obviously I was acting with some kind of malicious or destructive intent. right? Somebody would say that's different than the wheel coming off and me swerving and striking something and damaging it, or striking a living thing and killing it, right? One of them is an accident and the other one was some kind of intent, right? Maybe they do make those. I mean, there's things that we make those kinds of distinctions in insurance cases, right? It's an act of God. That's what I write it up as, like an earthquake or a hurricane or whatever, some kind of calamity. But in the case that VEKL's talking about, he didn't start there. He started with all events happen. All these events happen for a purpose. They happen for God's purpose. That would include calamities and acts of intentional evil. So him trying to ask now, like, oh no, well, I think, the Bible has a difference between moral evil and natural evil. So what? Both of those categories. This is like what he tried to do before. Like, no. Well, there's what God wills and there's what God permits. So what? Everything happens either because God wills it or God permits it. Everything that happens is either natural evil, or, anything that happens that you would call evil is either natural evil or moral evil. But regardless of what category it hits, it's happening because God allows it. So next,
some other natural catastrophe, something like that. So, obviously God allows or decrees these things to occur as we see in Scripture. So,
look, I just want to know if I say that whether it's natural or moral evil, I just mean it ought not happen. You're saying that's not how you use the term. So could you just give me a strict meaning of give me your sense of evil?
Well, like I said, I don't know how else to explain it to you. All we see in Scripture is that God is either allowing it or decreeing it. But either way, he's not caught off guard by these events that are occurring. So if you want to dig more.
Nobody's saying that he is. God's caught off. That at no point does evil require God to be surprised by something.
I'm not talking about any of that. Look, maybe use an example. Let's say that on Christianity, that homosexuality ought not happen, which means that homosexuality is evil. Do you accept that?
Yeah, homosexuality ought not to happen. Yes.
Okay, so it looks like you share a concept with me. You use the same term, the same sense of we use the same sense of the term, that if it's evil, it ought not happen. Okay, which means now going back to your other claim that if every event has a purpose, that means every event should happen. If every event should happen, that means there are no events that shouldn't happen. If there are no events that shouldn't happen, that means there's no evil.
No, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, unless you want to just
that's a strict syllogism, VEKL.
Well, again.
And I gotta agree with Danny. It is. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And VEKL says, no, I don't agree with that. But what VEKL can easily do here, he could just go back and just take back the comment that he made, that all things happen for God's purpose. Now he's not going to, because it's probably a verse in the Bible. And given that VEKL is something of a biblical inerrantist, or I believe that's where he leans, a biblicist, he can't. Well, the Bible says that, and it says it in plain English, the language Jesus spoke. So it can't be not true. Sorry, that's a double negative. VEKL wouldn't say that. This gets really exhausting, because VEKL could just step back and be like, well, you know what I mean, but it doesn't have to be exactly that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, sure, the evil things happen and people do, but ultimately, at the end of it, all these events taken into a big lump, at the end of the day, God's will win out. It's going to work towards his plan. When VEKL says, no, every event happens as part of God's purpose, Danny was certain to ask him that. All of them. So if something happens, if an event happens, it's an event that should have happened, right? It couldn't have not happened because it's for God's purpose. And VEKL's like, yep. And as soon as someone starts pointing out as soon as it starts dawning on VEKL what the entailments for claims like this are, for goofy, shallow, insipid statements like that are, instead of giving up the statement, what's he doing? He's ducking and weaving all over the place, trying to avoid this. Like, dude, just admit that if there's evil in the world, certain things happen that defy God's will. That's what fucking sin is. These guys get so wrapped up in this stuff definitionally. I'm like, no. Sin's part of God's plan too. Okay, sure, fine, it is. But in order to hold us accountable for it, God can't possibly, if God's all good, he can't possibly want me to murder people. But if you listen to VEKL long enough, it sure as hell sounds like that's what God wants people to do. I made you to murder. Get out there and murder. You're an object lesson to the other people who will come to me in repentance, seeking my comfort and aid because you're a horrible murderer. By the way, you're condemned. You're going to hell. You shouldn't have been a murderer. By the way, good job. Fucking nuts.
But you do see God responding to the evil that's in the world, though. See, that's
which premise do you deny?
Well, if you're seeing that God is responding to the evil, why is that a problem?
Can you just tell me what? Do you accept the argument, or is there a?
No, the only thing I'll accept is that which God condemns, we should not do. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that these things are still happening. Okay, when we're talking about God's prescriptive will,
I'm sorry. Which premise do you reject? What premise do you reject?
I reject the idea that you're saying that these things happen outside of God's will.
I'm not.
He's not saying that. He's not saying that. You're saying that all these things would happen. The entailment, VEKL, is that everything that happens for a reason and happens for God's purpose. Therefore, everything that happens because God wanted it. Like this is he's not paying attention. And the big mistake that Danny's making here, and it's not that he doesn't have the right angle on the syllogism. It's just that in asking this question, and I think Danny's talked to VEKL before, so maybe he already knew what this was going to do, but in having this conversation with VEKL is not going to be able. VEKL is not disciplined enough and is not considerate enough and thoughtful enough to go through this step by step like Danny's going to try to do it. VEKL is going to get into his feelings and start trying to cover his ass.
I'm not saying that. You want me to repeat the premises for you?
Yeah, go ahead, do it.
Okay. So if every event has a purpose, that entails that every event should happen, has a function, or it should happen. Okay? Mm-hmm. If every event should happen, mm-hmm. that means there are no events that shouldn't happen. If there are no events that shouldn't happen, that means that there is no evil. No events are evil.
Okay, and you're saying, therefore, if these things happen, therefore God is allowing it to happen.
No, I'm not going that far. Do you?
Jesus, VEKL, no. See what he did? If I were Danny, I would add, like, can you repeat, but can you paraphrase just those moves? Paraphrase those points.
You accept that because
I don't understand the way you're phrasing it. I'm saying that these things happen, and God condemns these things, but that doesn't mean that they're not.
Which premise do you reject in that syllogism?
I wish Danny hadn't cut him off there because I wanted to know how he was going to finish that. That was really weird, right? So, because I'm pretty sure where VEKL was going with that was he's condemning people for doing this, but it's being done for God's purpose. And that's a big one, right? From a lot of different angles, right? That's the kind of thing where, if you've got like a psycho, right, who's just like, well, look, I've read a little bit of the Bible, I've been exposed to a little bit of church, and I know that I'm built for destruction. That's what I'm for, and I know I'm destined for hell, right? But I have to do what God put me here to do, and if I wasn't meant to kill those people, I wouldn't have been able to kill those people, because the only things that happen in this world happen because God allows it, according to his plan and his goodwill. So here I am on death row, with a score of 24, whatever he's got going on. On the other side too, try telling the victim of somebody, the survivors, right? The victim's surviving family members that, like, oh, well, I can't imagine what you're going through. I'm sorry about your loss. I can only imagine what kind of, the agony, blah, 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 blah. But God wanted it this way. Peace out. Part of God's plan. Your son or daughter or spouse or whatever, they were a necessary sacrifice because the horrible evil visited upon them by this creep over here, also made by God, all of that was part of God's plan to serve a purpose, to bring everyone ultimately, all the people that are supposed to be closer to God, it will make sure that they get closer to him, except for the person whose evil deeds were responsible for that, or instrumental in bringing them about, except of course for that person whose soul will be sacrificed because of that. Fucked up.
it sounds to me like you're saying that God is, since these things are happening, therefore God is.
No, I'm not saying any of that. I can repeat the syllogism again, and you can just stop me when you disagree. Okay? So you said every event has a purpose, right? You accept that, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. And that entails that every event should happen.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. And if every event should happen, that logically entails that no events shouldn't happen. Do you accept that?
That logically entails that no events. I don't know what that means.
So there are no.
So VEKL's admitting that he can't understand a double negative. If all events happen for a purpose, then everything that happens should happen. That means that everything that does happen, it shouldn't not have happened. And given that evil, part of it at least, can an aspect of evil that we can define as simply something that shouldn't have happened. None of these events are categorized as things that shouldn't have happened. They should have happened. They were part of God's purpose. I don't understand why VEKL can't work this back. Or he's playing dumb. But given some conversations that I've had with him, he doesn't have to play at this.
No events that ought not happen if it's true that every event should happen. So if I say all the houses are green, that means no houses are not green, right?
Okay.
Okay, so if you say all events should happen.
You then, so ultimately, what do you like? Why don't you just cut to the chase and just tell me what it is that you disagree with regard to Scripture?
He told you, man.
He's already told you. He set it up as a syllogism. He's disagreed with this claim that you made about all events having a purpose. They all like. Oh, why don't you just tell me the part where the part that you disagree with? He did. He's been telling you that repeatedly.
Yeah.
Okay, but what show me in Scripture though? I mean, you just disagree with.
I'm not disputing Scripture here. I'm
Okay.
telling you the entailment of the view that every event has a purpose. The entailment of that view is that there's no evil based on the syllogism I gave you.
Why is that wrong? Where is the fallacy in me saying that?
That there's no evil?
I didn't say there was no evil. I said everything has a purpose.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I gave you an argument, premise by premise,
but I'm
for why that entails that there's no evil.
What's the fallacy of what I'm saying? I'm saying that evil exists. Okay, God obviously allows it to occur because He's omnipotent.
No, we're not talking about that. I'm talking about the entailment.
But I'm talking about. I mean, if you want to try to get fancy,
Do you want to engage with my argument, or you just want to change the subject?
Well, I'm trying to understand what is it that you're trying to refute here, because I'm a little confused.
Look, I gave you an argument for why. If you believe that every event has a purpose, that means you think every event should happen. That entails that no event shouldn't happen. That entails that there's no evil. That's a straight up syllogism for going from the premise that if every event has a purpose to there's no evil.
Okay. I'm a little, I guess I'm just not following you then.
So go over it again, Danny.
Because obviously we have evil in the world. Obviously, God is all powerful, so therefore He has the ability to stop it from happening. Matter of fact, He has the ability to make it not exist.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not talking about any of that. In fact, notice that none of.
I do commend Danny here for wrangling VEKL here, and keeping him on track with this thing. But I did want to hear him go on just a little bit longer because I wondered where he was going with that.
My premises. But notice that none of my premises involve God.
Danny, that's what I'm talking about, though. I don't really care.
No, you want to change the subject because look.
Wow, VEKL's not an active listener. Oh, you can say that again, John. You can say that again. And yeah, this is hilarious. Like I don't want to do this. Like he's already tapping out, and he hasn't really engaged with this, and it's so easy to get out. Like just get back to that. Like, what about those Bible verses that seem to suggest that God has created all of these things for His purpose? Like, yeah, but what the intention of those particular verses isn't to say that every single event is mapped out by God, including all the horrible stuff that happens. It's to say that this is where things get weird with Christianity, right? In the end, all this stuff's going to work out, and it's all going to be fine. Right? Yes, people are going to do horrible things and horrible calamities will happen, and we live in a fallen world after all, and God didn't want any for that stuff to happen. But in the end, ultimately, it's all going to work out for His purpose, right? You have to take this broad view. VEKL was the one that stepped his foot into this by trying to be super literal about it. And the thing is that I don't know that there's a verse in the Bible where he would have to take a stance that strong, this specific, this strongly, and yet for some reason he's not backing off it. That's really the only thing he would have to do, and Danny would be, he could end Danny's entire his entire critique here.
It doesn't matter.
Listen, I don't care about the fancy syllogism that you're coming up with, okay?
Because you don't care about the argument.
Well, what?
You don't care about the argument?
No, not really. I just care about what Scripture says.
Is there a reason why you don't care?
So I love that he doesn't care about arguments, but if the Bible has any, if Scriptures have any meaning, they need to be rational. They need to be reasonable, right? Or otherwise, if you're reading contradictory things in the Bible, then how do you know which one is the one to do? And VEKL believes in a clear contradiction here, at least so far as Danny's walked him through.
Care about the argument? Do you think it's invalid?
Yeah, because what you're doing, I think it's getting away from what
fallacy am I committing?
Okay, I think it's getting away from what Scripture says about who God is.
I can grant Scripture. That's fine. I can grant Scripture. Okay, I'm not disputing Scripture.
Great. But you are, though, by saying that there's no evil. Then if he's
no, I'm not just saying that, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you believe
these things happen. Okay, wait a minute. So what are you ultimately saying?
I'm saying this.
There is no evil.
It's a very simple argument, right? If you believe that every event has a purpose, that implies that you think every event should happen. If every event should happen, that means that there are no events that shouldn't happen. If there are no events that shouldn't happen, then that means there are no events that are evil, which means that there's no evil. That's the straight up syllogism.
Every event should happen. That's what you said, right? That's the first part, right?
The first premise is that every event has a purpose. That entails that every event should happen. Okay,
let's stop there. Again, when you say that every event should happen, meaning what? That this is something that God is ordaining, or this?
Oh my God.
This is something outside of God that's going to happen anyway.
What do you mean, VEKL? You're the one who said it and agreed to it. Every event has a purpose, right? Which means every event that happens should happen. He agreed to this. Definitively, like proudly agreed to this at the beginning, within the first minute or so of their conversation. And now he's like, no, what do you mean by it? What the hell do you mean by it, VEKL? Damn.
What are you trying to say?
Well, the idea is that if every event has a purpose, there's an aim or in mind, right?
Ultimately, yeah. That's
in the mind of God, right? Which means that if God has some aim or drive or desire, it should happen.
Right. In this sovereign case, right? In the sovereignty, whether we understand it or fully grasp it or not, there's ultimately a purpose to it happening. So
but you could say that about all events as an aggregate, or just everything bundled together. You don't have to take that claim. You don't have to take that position on literally every event that happens. That'd be like, if I stub my toe, that's part of God's plan for ultimate salvation for the maximum number of people that he's decided he's going to save. I don't think so. I really wonder if VEKL does not seem to understand the notion of, like, the idea of deriving entailments from things.
And I'm speaking from a temporal mind, trying to understand the infinite mind of God. So, I'm not doing it justice.
But you can't even understand the temporal mind of Danny.
Oh, I don't think any human ever will. But we're asserting that through faith that these things happen as a result of God's permissive decree. Or
I'm not talking about any of that. In fact, I could make that argument independent of all of that. The argument is that you can, if you want to think that there's evil in the world, you cannot think that every event has a purpose, right? It's based on my argument.
Wait, say that one more time.
Yeah, essentially, if you believe that every event has a purpose, given the argument that I gave, that you think that would entail that there's no evil, but you think there's evil, so that means you have to revise your view.
Well, I'm saying that there's a purpose behind God either decreeing it or allowing it to occur, but it's not above God's power for these things to happen.
Yeah, I'm not talking about, look, VEKL, you do believe that every event has a purpose, right?
These things happen, it's either because God allows it to occur or he directly decrees it to occur, but he's not.
Makes no difference, VEKL. That does not make a difference. The fact that he decreed everything that happens is in those two categories, which means everything that happens, whether he's decreeing it or allowing it, right, it sounds like VEKL's doubling down on the fact that if he decrees it or he allows it, it was something that was supposed to happen. Yes. So if you think that evil occurs, how do you reconcile that with this notion? You have an all-good God that allows that either decrees certain things to happen or allows certain things to happen, and sometimes some of those things are bad. Some of them are evil, meaning they shouldn't have happened. But this all-good God allowed them. Now, I don't think VEKL would ever say that he decrees a bad thing to happen, although there's plenty of instances in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where he does. And if he wants to go to Isaiah, where he's like, oh, well, you have to figure out that natural evil and the moral evil part. He does decree, and VEKL believes this, God does decree moral evil, or natural evil should happen. So I don't think that VEKL can keep all this stuff straight. Really, I don't think anybody can. But at the end of the day, like he's still trying to stretch this into like, well, no, you don't understand what God, there's what God decrees and there's what God, it doesn't matter, man. This started from all events have a purpose. And if they have a purpose, that means they must happen. They must have occurred. That means they should have happened. And part of something being evil is that it shouldn't have happened. So no evil events occur.
And he's not detached from it at all.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying that if you believe that every event has a purpose, you believe that every event has
well, from a temporal mind that, if every event has a purpose, I don't have to have a full understanding of what.
I'm not saying you do. I'm not telling you have to have a full account. I'm just saying that the belief analytically or by definition implies that every event should happen.
If an evil event should happen, it's because either God allows it to occur.
I'm not talking about that.
Or he decrees it.
I'm just saying that if you believe that every event has a purpose, that entails that every event should happen. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Wait, say that one more time.
Yeah, do you agree with the statement that if you believe that every event has a purpose, that implies that every event should happen? Do you believe that?
In temporal mind, I guess I do. Yeah.
In a non-temporal sense, too?
Yeah, because I don't have the mind of God, so I don't know. I don't have full understanding.
Okay, so you do.
So VEKL has just retreated into the God's mysterious category. This is actually pretty common for VEKL. I think he does this when people talk to him about slavery too.
Believe then you're committed to thinking that every event should happen as well, right?
In God's mind, if these things are going to happen, if it's because there's an ultimate purpose behind it, therefore it's going to happen. Yes.
No, not it's going to happen, that it should happen.
What do you mean should happen? You mean like ought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it has a purpose, it should happen.
Well, that doesn't make any. What did I say that was wrong? I said if God decrees it, then it ought to happen.
Even if it's bad.
Okay, yeah. So if every event has a purpose, that purpose being understood in terms of the desires of God, the aims of God.
I like how he kind of gave that up. Like even VEKL is not understanding. Like, well, if he decrees it to happen, it's going to happen. Yeah, but the other things that happen are ones that he allowed to happen. So he's got his decretive will, I think that's how VEKL puts it, and his permissive will. But all events hit those same two categories. There isn't a third category somewhere where there are things that happen that don't happen for a purpose and are therefore maybe evil. This started out with VEKL's claim that everything happens for a purpose.
That means that every event should happen.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if every event should happen, that means there are no events that should not happen. Right? And if there are no events that should not happen, that implies that there's no evil.
Well, the events that should not happen don't happen.
Sure, right? And so then that implies that there's no evil if there's no events that shouldn't happen.
But there is evil because this is what God has obviously ordained.
Yeah, so you're contradicting yourself when you say that every event has a purpose. You can't think that and also think that there's evil.
If every event has a purpose, okay, obviously we're including such things as evil in the world. Okay, and we even see passages where God actually creates an evil. Isaiah 45:7, for example, he says, I create darkness, I create light, I create good, I create evil. We got several passages elsewhere that clearly shows God bringing about the evil. He's actually attributing certain things, evil things, to himself. He's saying that I did that. Okay,
so do you think?
But when that's being communicated to us, right, it's evil for us. But he's punishing us. It's always been weird to me that that's the language that's conveyed, right? Especially coming from Isaiah. Like, I'm going to bring these. Now, the one thing that they'll be like, well, no, God's not saying that he's going to visit some evil on people. He's going to visit calamities on you. Oh, okay. That's so much better. Like, you pissed me off so bad, I'm going to smite your town with an earthquake. Or I'm going to hit you with a meteorite. Does that any better? Like, oh, it's not bad, it's just divine punishment. And, if you're a divine command theorist or something like that, or just, completely servile to the will of God, anything that God does, any monstrous punishment he visits on people in the here and now is whatever, right? It's automatically justified, right? It has to be. He's God. God doesn't require some external justification. Anything he does by definition must be right. So I'm wondering I'm wondering why, like, all this stuff I think is bouncing around in VEKL's head, and he's forgetting where this started with. It started with him just that first thing, and he keeps losing sight of that.
Do you think if some event is evil, it should not happen?
Say it again.
Do you think if some event is evil, it ought not happen or should not happen? All things being equal.
Listen, just because God doesn't prescribe it or speaks against it or condemns anyone from doing it, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean that God in his sovereignty does not or cannot utilize that event, that evil action that individuals
Sorry,
doing.
is that a yes or a no? Or an I don't know.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand your question.
Yeah, VEKL, maybe you should write it down.
I don't think he is.
On a piece of paper.
Well, I don't see what the problem is. I mean, are you trying to?
There's a huge problem here, man.
There's a glaring contradiction going on, VEKL, and I think you're aware of it, but you don't want to deal with it.
It's blatantly obvious.
I'm trying to understand what the problem is.
The problem is that if you think that everything it has a purpose, that means in the mind of God. Right?
Because the contrary is that these things are happening outside of God's will, outside of God's power, and therefore God.
I'm not disputing any of that. I'm not talking about any of that.
Yeah, and what would be wrong with that? Like us sinning? Right, like this gets into VEKL's theology pretty well here. It's not that just the case that like people do things that are against God's will, but they're also part of God's plan. So God has this unique position of, I need you to be a disgusting, degenerate, reprobate sinner, but I am also going to blame you for it. The entailments for VEKL's position are actually getting worse from this very simple syllogism that Danny has laid out for him.
I'm just saying that if anyone believes, whether it be you or someone else, that everything has a purpose, okay, that would imply that every event should happen.
Okay, when you say every event should happen, you're saying that if it should happen, that means that this is under God's power, or is this something that God? Because I'm a little confused when you say should.
Okay, do you understand what I mean by homosexuality?
Are you saying that these things should happen or they ought to happen?
Yeah, it's in the same way that you think.
It's the same thing, man. I'm not exactly sure how he's getting should and ought in this case confused. Like, it's just being used for the definition of evil in this case. If an event of all events happen for a purpose, that means, and especially for God's purpose, that means those events should have happened, which entails that those events should not have happened, which actually fits the definition of what something evil would be, an event that shouldn't have happened. This really is simple. I have seen VEKL goof up some really obvious things. He has disagreed with me for agreeing with him. It's actually happened. It was years ago. I think I was on that Jesus is Lord Rebuke and Reprove guy's channel. I've had conversations with him before, and I've actually backed his point up only to have him mute me and then correct me and completely get it wrong. And then I'll come back and be like, I agreed with you, ding dong. I actually was supporting what you said. Oh, okay. And I rarely would get a genuine apology either, by the way. He's kind of close to Darth Dawkins in that way.
And are they ought to happen because this is what God decrees it to occur? Decrees it to be? Or
what God wants, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah. So the idea is this. So the syllogism goes as this: if you think that every event has an
event that occurs, if it has a purpose, that means that it should happen.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now every event should happen then that means that there are no events that should not happen.
Okay, now how are you determining? Let's go to the issue of evil, because you're saying that there's no such thing as evil. How are you determining?
I didn't say that. No, I did not say that.
Didn't you say that? Well, yes, you did.
No, that's the conclusion of the argument, right? You have the argument supports that conclusion, and I'm trying to give you the argument.
Okay, so wait a minute. Wait. You said that if God allows these things to occur and they have a purpose, therefore these things ought to happen. All these events ought to happen, right?
Right. That's your view. Your view is that every event has a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means that every event should happen.
Go on with the next part. Go on with the next part. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So if you think every event should happen, that implies that there are no events that should not happen.
Everything that God allows or decrees should happen. Yes.
Okay. So then that means
allows or decrees. Remember that. I'm wondering if when Danny finishes this again, if VEKL's going to forget the allows part.
That if that's predicated over every event, that means there are no events that should not happen. Correct?
The events that should not happen will not happen. Yes.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are no events that should not happen.
There are no events that should not happen. Yes, because they won't happen because
that's implied if you believe that every event should happen.
The events that should not happen won't happen at all.
No, that's not. Look, I'm saying
no.
That if you believe that all events should happen, that implies the proposition that no events shouldn't happen.
Maybe I'm a little lost with your.
Yeah, look, in the same way that if I say every house is blue, that means there are no houses that are not blue.
I am really curious to know what VEKL is attempting to superimpose onto this, because he does not want to acknowledge where Danny's going with this, and he seems to be trying to tack something onto it, and like it's just not. It's funny. It's like wow.
Okay, right. What's your ultimate argument is what? That there's no. If this is true, then there's no such thing as evil. Or what did you say?
No, that's the conclusion. That's not the argument, right? We have we can't just jump to the conclusion, right? So the point is that if you accept the premise that everything has a purpose, every event has a purpose, that means every event should happen. If every event should happen, that means there are no events that should not happen. If there are no events that should not happen, that means that there are no events that are evil. That means there's no evil.
I still don't understand that conclusion, though. You saying that therefore it should not happen, therefore there's no evil?
Yeah, no. I'm saying that if you believe that there are no events that ought not happen or should not happen, then that implies the belief that there are no events that are evil.
I still.
Yeah, Cascade. Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise, he is because this either way, like he better be telling people this, because anybody that sees this, he sounds like a moron here. So he better start telling people, oh yeah, no, I knew where Danny was going with that, but I don't agree with him. But the reason that VEKL has to resist this is because there's no way out of this, right? Well, there is a way out of this. That one of the ways out of it is to do what I told him to do, but he doesn't want to do that because I don't know, maybe he doesn't do Bible study with skeptics or something like that, or maybe he doesn't understand that he doesn't have to hold to this particular position as rigidly as he is. But he's not going to give that up. He's not going to give that up to Danny. So yeah, I mean, he could be just pretending not to understand it. Oh, I don't understand it. I don't think you understand scripture.
Still don't know if I understand you, because I don't believe that.
Can somebody write that in the chat, and you can. I
don't believe that the events that should happen cannot include any type of evil act occurring.
Yeah, so then let's examine that. Do you think that if homosexuality is wrong, that means it should not happen? Or if homosexuality is evil, that means it should not happen?
Well, obviously God is allowing it to occur because it's rampant.
Yeah, I'm not talking about allowing. I'm just making sure we have the same.
See, so he's remembering, like, God's permitting it. God's permitting homosexual acts, but homosexual acts are things that should not happen. So they're evil. So they're right. And God is permitting them. But VEKL doesn't understand the basic contradiction that he's walked into. But he believes that everything that happens for a purpose, which means it's happening for God's purpose. I don't understand why he doesn't see that. Like that's the basic contradiction there. Like, oh yeah, he allows some evil to happen. Okay, but that's not consistent with your first claim. It's not just that he's allowing that to happen or decree. Like, I think VEKL is getting confused. Like, oh yeah, sure, when he decrees it to happen, it will happen. It's got to happen, and it should happen. Of course, it's good. But if every event happens, that would include the stuff that God permits to happen. That's happening because he needs it to happen. That happens according to his purpose. It's like VEKL just like, oh yeah, any of that evil stuff, that doesn't count. So it's like, okay, so it's irrelevant that it's evil? Like, this makes no sense. If every event has a purpose, that would include the stuff that God permits. It would include the bad as well as the good. And if that's the case and he's permitting it and it's for his purpose, then ultimately none of that stuff is bad.
Sense of evil.
Let me finish. Obviously, God is allowing it to occur because it still exists.
Oh my God.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that that's part of his prescriptive will.
Yeah, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just making sure.
Well, I love that it's not part of his prescriptive will, but he's permitting it to happen, and you said every event has a purpose.
Sure, we agree on the sense of evil. Yeah, what I'm talking about is whether we're talking past each other, right? Are we talking past each other?
Definitely.
When I hear something like
maybe.
Yeah, when I hear someone say, if you were to say to me, VEKL, that raping an innocent girl is evil, I would interpret that as raping an innocent girl ought not happen. Would I correctly interpret you?
It ought not happen, but that doesn't mean though that God in his power and his sovereignty.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. Just, do we agree on the sense of evil now?
Yes.
Okay, so evil is that which should not happen then, right?
But they don't, because VEKL will need to change the definition of evil when he feels cornered. So I like it might be the most honest he's been in the conversation. Do we agree on that definition of evil? Yes, like with 40 question marks. Yeah, no, you don't, VEKL.
Right?
Yeah, because it's contrary to God's prescription.
Yeah, that's fine. That's all fine. So evil is that which ought not happen. So if we go back to this,
a good question, algorithm. Why is Danny doing this to himself? I don't know, but he was in here for a long time, and I've actually gone through this one longer than I thought I would. But I'm going to keep going while it's still. VEKL is still bringing the cringe. Jesus.
Syllogism. That's every event has a purpose. That means that all events should happen. If all events should happen, there are no events that should not happen, which means that there are no events that are evil, because you and I agree on the definition of evil as that which should not happen. So if there are no events that should not happen, there are no events that are evil. Therefore, there's no evil.
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. See, so my view, I look at it very simply.
What? That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. He didn't say anything about it not happening. He's talking about the category of what those events are, good or evil. Oh my God, VEKL.
Very extremely layman's terms here. There's evil in the world, okay? Both moral and natural evil. These things occur in the world. God is sovereign. He's sovereign over all things. He has a permissive will and he has a decorative will.
Yep.
Permissive meaning that he allows things to occur or he prescribes things to occur that, and things happen contrary to that. And then he has a decorative will, which nothing contrary will happen to that.
A decorative will. Like, you mean like a corsage or like a table setting? What, a decorative will?
It will not. This is something that he decrees and it will come to pass. Now, I, as a finite human being, believe, according to what we see in scripture, that everything.
And before I let him do this, Dan, he was saying really dumb stuff before we argued, so I decided to try to show him that he's saying dumb stuff. Yeah, I appreciate that, Danny. It made for a good video. He goes around thinking he doesn't say dumb stuff. Oh, I know. I know. Danny, would you like a link? I can send you one. If you're on Discord, I can DM you one, or I could email you one.
Whether it's decorative under God's decorative will or permissive will, ultimately has a purpose. Nothing happens arbitrarily. Okay, I don't have to have a full understanding of these things, right? All we know is that, number one, God says this and that are evil and these things ought not to happen. But we obviously know that God is omnipotent, so he therefore allows these things to occur, and he sends men and women out in the world to speak against these evil things. and he therefore ultimately shows.
Yeah, I just want to know what premise you reject. I don't know. I can't follow what premise you're rejecting.
Say about it. That's all I need to say about it, really.
Yeah, tell me what premise you're rejecting of the argument, because I'm not sure that's not clear to anyone.
I'm not quite sure. I'm just trying to give you an understanding of my position. I do.
Yeah, what is your position with respect to the premises of my argument?
I'm trying to give you a better understanding of my philosophical position on what we see in Scripture. I mean, you can reject it if you want and say that it's a.
No, it's just confusing because it's not clear which premise you reject of my argument.
But what I think the only thing that I'm really concerned is whether or not what I'm saying is contrary to what we see in Scripture. I don't really.
Jesus, he's getting to the contrary to Scripture. But you don't entirely have to get into Scripture to get where this contradiction is. VEKL is just overcomplicating this, I think, in the hopes that Danny will get exhausted and leave. I don't know what's going on. Danny, I did email that to you, to your Phil Talk one. Okay.
I really care about the atheist philosophical angles to it.
It's not. I don't. It's just a regular syllogism.
I don't. Yeah.
And I don't even know. I'm just.
I got Mark Kabas. He was going on and on today about how incoherent atheist arguments are. Really? I don't think Danny's argument was incoherent at all, and it does have it has an entailment to it that is potentially devastating for a Christian worldview, specifically VEKL's worldview. So, God. Hey, Danny, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
This channel, by the way, y'all should subscribe to the Clubhouse Debates. There are a lot of stuff like this, so if y'all like this kind of stuff, you should subscribe to the Clubhouse Debates stuff.
Yeah, a good reminder. I've got these links, the videos that I've got, the links are in the description. So when you click on those, subscribe to Clubhouse Debates. And Scott Smith 75 has been doing some newer stuff, and then he's been kind of like bringing out some older video clips too. So Danny, when did this conversation with you and VEKL happen? Was this just like a couple days ago?
It was like maybe a few days ago, yeah. Because he was saying stuff about how. He was talking really, I don't remember, and I don't recall exactly what he said, but he was saying really negative stuff about non-believers. Okay. And for he went on this tirade about non-believers. And I just got fed up with it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to show why he doesn't have anything here, right? Like he doesn't. So I just waited for him to say something like everything has a purpose, and that was enough. Because, I talked to a Christian few days ago, and you know what they told me? I would just stop. I don't have to think that everything has a purpose, right? Like that's all he had to do, right? All he had to do was say, "You're right. Not everything has a purpose," and then done.
Yeah. And that was my first when I first saw this part. I'm like, oh my God, why is he digging his heels in on this? Like he was not going to give you that ground. Like most Christians would not be like, oh, well, that accident my daughter had, when she broke a tooth or she broke her arm, like no one was like, well, that was, that happened because God wanted it to. Like no one, your average Christian doesn't think like that. So the fact that he's just been kind of caught off of this like very kind of superficial deepity, like, oh, well, everything happens for a purpose, like everything. Seriously? So I do appreciate the fact that you caught him out on that, but what makes it better is that VEKL will not give you any ground at all, nothing, and that's all. And that's really all he's got to do. He's like, well, I don't mean like every single thing. I mean like the whole, the total in totality, everything's going to work out the way God ultimately wants things to work out. And
go ahead.
No, that was it.
Yeah, I wanted to point out two things. Number one, notice my argument doesn't even mention God. Anybody that believes this, right, that everything has a purpose, in some kind of ultimate sense, then ultimately there's no evil. Anyone. And what he was trying to do the whole time is show why he believes some of these premises, right? Why he believes everything has a purpose. Why? But that's just not important, right? Because you could make the argument to an atheist who thinks that everything has a purpose, because we hear that trope, and usually people don't really mean it in some kind of robust sense. Everything that happens for a reason, right? And they're not there. They're talking about like it should happen. There's like a sense in which you're talking about explanation, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about purpose, like goodness. Everything has an aim or a function. So, my argument, I think I should. There are a lot of things I could have done differently, but like I look at people like VEKL in terms of making progress, kind of like an asymptote, and where like you can make changes, but you're never going to reach like the progress line. Right. Like, it's like a limit there, right? You can make. I could have done things differently, but it would have been turned out the same.
It's one of the VEKL is like, for me, he's a lot like Gavin Herleman from over at Praise's channel, where I will say things to them, and at this point I know what things are going to kind of like get them agitated, and they agitate and they make some noise and stuff, and then they settle right back to where they were before, and it ultimately does nothing. Like anything that I say, and it's weird, it seems to be the stuff where they become most performatively offended at is the stuff that seems to be the stuff that they're going to reflect the least about. So it makes no difference at all. I don't know what it would take to actually kind of get under their skin. It would have to be something probably coming from a peer that just kind of slipped in there, became like a little mind worm and worked at them for a while. And then 10 years from now, all of a sudden one of them's a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox or something, they had some kind of theological change in something. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. Every time you started mentioning the prescriptive will and the decretive will and all that, it just doesn't matter. I don't care why you think everything has a purpose, or right. The point is that if you accept that proposition, right? So you could have gone in the direction of addressing the whole allowing and permissive will, all the types of wills. But in my experience, that leads that's a red herring, right? It doesn't matter why you accept the first premise, right? If you accept it, this is the entailment, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. And even if he I liked how he was the one that tried to get into like the distinctions between natural and moral evil. Like that's not going to help you, man. Like I don't know why you're doing that. Like stay away from that.
Again, like it just doesn't. If it's evil, it doesn't. I don't care what type of evil it is, right? Like
yeah. It's like, okay, well, if now that you've made that distinction, like I really don't think it's going to. Even if you want to, like, well, there's two different kinds according to the Bible and in the mind of God. Like, okay, in the mind, that earthquake or that genocide created by that crazy person. Two different categories of evil. So what? But ultimately, you believe that those events happen for God's purpose. So that's what you said before. That's what you're hooked on.
When someone steals, and versus when a hurricane kills a lot of people, they're going to share property. The property of, it's too bad it happened, right? Like it's like we ought to have not happened, especially if we were in control of the situation. So, and God's in control of the situation. So,
yeah, right, yeah. All right, here we go.
This is actually something entailed by your belief.
I have to be honest, man. I really don't care about any of the syllogisms. What I care about really is
whether, so you're not interested in an argument.
What I really care about is whether or not what I'm saying is contrary or in alignment with what Scripture says. So if you can give some sort of a Christian in here who shares the same philosophical views that you do in the room, let them in, and maybe they can tell me.
Yeah, I'm not giving you any of my views. I'm saying the entailment of your views. Your view is that everything has a purpose.
My view is consistent though within itself, because I'm saying to you that God in his
it's not consistent if you don't reject one of the premises of my argument.
It's very consistent, because
then that means that which premise do you reject? What premise do you reject of my argument?
What I'm saying is that it's very consistent within my worldview.
That means you reject a premise. So which premise do you reject?
It's consistent within my worldview, because I've already told you, and there's several passages if you want to go through them, every last one of them one by one.
I love this, because this seems to me like a desperate attempt at trying to pull the old theological smokescreen. Like, oh, if you want to go through some Bible with me, like, is he really trying to flex on you with the Bible verses?
Yeah, this was a desperate move. But the point is that he made it sound like this was my view, when I was all along, I was telling him, look, if you believe this, then there's a problem. And then suddenly he's like, oh, bring a Christian in here that takes your view. I'm like, I don't take this view. You take this view, right? I was so confused. I mean, it was desperation, I think.
He's really, I because a lot of people in the live chat here are like, I think he's playing dumb. And I'm like, that's not something that he often has to play at. I mean, because here's the thing. I think he could think through this if he wanted to, but I think he's too busy worrying about getting trapped or committing to something that he doesn't want to. And the weird thing is that he has committed to something really stupid. He's committed to believing a contradiction.
Yeah.
This is not cool.
I think the only time where he actually didn't really understand was when I went from everything is good or everything should happen to therefore nothing should not happen. Like there's no events that should not happen. That might have been the only time where I sensed genuine, like I don't understand. But after I said, like, if all the houses are green, that means none of the houses are not green. Right? Like so, and then he understood, right? So like, but other than that, it was just obfuscation in my opinion. But maybe someone knows people better than I do.
I've known him for a while. I probably have known him a little longer than you have. I can't because he's been around a long time. Well, actually, no, you've been around longer than I have, because you didn't you used to do the Phil Talk stuff back in the day?
Oh, Pal Talk stuff?
Or
no.
Pal Talk, yeah.
So I've been around in this broad community, Discord and YouTube and all that since 2017. So
okay.
He was there before. So no, y'all are more old school than I am.
Yeah, he'd been around since before because I think around 2017, late 2016 was kind of when I got introduced to things, but I didn't get this channel until 2019. VEKL had been around since the Google Hangout days. So yeah. All right, let's play a little bit more of this, and then I'm probably gonna wrap this one up a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I'm not contesting any of that. I'm contesting.
But Danny, here's the problem. Danny, I don't care if you're not or you are contesting anything. The fact of the matter is
you're not interested in the conversation. Is there any Christians in here that are interested in conversing? Because
Danny, I don't care about your silly syllogisms. Okay, all I care about
is anybody else interested in the argument?
Danny,
VEKL,
no, I want the room to be open for discussion. The problem is though that you're
not interested in discussion though, Danny, right? You're just interested in monologuing or something. I gave you an argument that shows why there's no evil on Danny, your view, and you're ignoring it. So are there any Christians in here that are interested in engaging with the argument? Maybe you can bring up a Christian that's actually interested in the discussion.
This is the problem with atheists, man.
VEKL, this is pure logic, man.
You have to win a debate. You have to.
But VEKL,
but you're not interested in the debate. I don't even consider you being part of the debate. You're not interested in discussing.
Fine. Well, fine then. That's fine.
Any Christians in here interested in discussing the argument?
Listen, man. All I'm trying to tell you is that there's nothing that I'm saying. If you have anything based off of Scripture that's contrary to what I'm saying, that's contrary to Scripture, then I would like to see it.
Yeah, I gave you an argument for why the inconsistency, and you won't reject one of the premises, which means that you're probably irrational.
No Christian is going to disagree with what I'm about to say right now. Number one, God is sovereign. Okay. Number two.
Yeah, I'm not disputing any of that. Is there any Christian that's interested in the argument for why why VEKL's committed thing is there's no evil?
Any Christians in here who actually takes a position similar to what Danny is saying here, who can argue?
No, you take the position I'm giving. You think that.
So yeah, there's a question here to Danny. VEKL could have just said that evil is part of God's plan, that it ought to happen too, right?
Yeah. So what a lot of theists do is they understand evil as something like all things being equal, it ought not happen. So let's just give an example. Being pricked with a needle, all things being equal, should not happen. But if you want to get vaccinated, right? It's a necessary evil, right? It's an evil that ought to happen. And that makes sense, I think, if you're talking about a limited being, okay? The idea is that it makes sense to say, there's a necessary evil that I get pricked in order to get vaccinated because I don't know how to get vaccinated without getting pricked. So think about the problem with the God case is they can't do that move, right? Why? Because let's say God has a goal, right? And he needs evil to accomplish his goal. He doesn't know how to accomplish his goal without evil. Then if that's true, then he's not omnipotent. So he does not have the privilege of using that definition. Whereas limited beings have that privilege because all things being equal, being pricked with a needle and given that sensation or whatever is not good, is evil, right? But it's a necessary evil if you're getting vaccinated because we don't know how to get vaccinated via a different method, right? It's just not going to be that sense of evil is not applicable in the case of God.
Yep, I agree. By the way, welcome.
So but he could have done that, right? But he didn't do that, right? I mean, I guess I could have given it to him, but then we just had to. First of all, getting him to understand that would have been pulling teeth.
Right? I liked the way this kind of was set up because I mean it's I mean, the fact that he's trying to attribute, like, you're trying to like say, okay, this is the statement and this is what it entails, and there's a contradiction there, and he was desperate, like from the beginning, to sort of like pivot that and say, oh, that's your opinion and that's not biblical, and so find me somebody else who agrees with you on that. Like, dude, like, you're not even paying attention to what's going on around you. Like, that has nothing to do with what.
Yeah, VEKL reminds me of one of our nephews. He doesn't want to be shown to be wrong or possibly mistaken in anything, so he will flail and do whatever he can to, try to, I guess, stay afloat. But in the process, he makes things a whole lot worse for himself, because then everybody can look back at this conversation and kind of go, Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Stop taking the
really weird. Hey, Mr. J, by the way, I'm glad you're here. What's really weird, too, is that there are responses that I was ready to respond to the responses, but there are responses to what I'm saying. He just gave none of them, right? Like, he could have just retracted and said, well, no, not everything has purpose, right? I'm using purpose in this different way. Maybe he could have done something like that. He could have done the evil thing that I suggested, but he just didn't really engage with it,
Well, this conversation just kind of reminded me of like, the image that I was getting in my head was like you and VEKL sitting in a room together, and you were sitting by a whole bunch of made up, pre-made paper airplanes. And every time he didn't catch what you were saying, you just tossed one of those things right over his head.
Yeah, I did repeat myself like 5 or 6 times.
No, you're still not getting. I'm waiting to see if this thing actually hits you in the temple or something.
Because there were a lot of, the conversation can go many different ways. The last thing I wanted to do is have a discussion about permissive will versus decretive will, have a discussion about sovereignty and all that. I didn't want to do any of that, right? I wanted to very, very hyper-focus. With someone like VEKL, you'd be hyper-focused. Otherwise, if you want to like get something like either a concession or make them look irrational. Otherwise, if those are not your goals, then yeah, you can talk about all these other things he's pulling from. But I just didn't want to do that. I try to remain hyper-focused.
All right. Sorry, I just got a message from Christopher Mowdy. He was checking in. Christopher Mowdy, I'm pretty sure knows VEKL, because they probably go back a ways. All right, let's get this started again.
Everything has a purpose, right?
I have a problem with the level of ignorance.
Do you believe that every event has a purpose, VEKL?
Danny, listen.
Do you believe that you said earlier you did.
Danny, listen. I don't have a problem with certain aspects of what I understand to be mysterious, if you will. The Bible leaves all kinds of room for Christians to have faith in certain areas where we can't prove scientifically. Okay, all I'm telling you is what I do know based off what we see in Scripture. God is sovereign. Evil exists in the world. God allows evil to occur. Okay, and God brings redemption through people. He brings conviction, and he brings judgment.
Well, I find interesting about that.
Do you think every event?
There's no argument there. Those were all talking points he was throwing out.
Yeah, they're pretty common theological assertions. But I mean, I'm wondering how he's going to answer this.
Yeah, I always see VEKL kind of do this. He kind of plays like the Fox News or CNN political opinion pundit kind of thing. He just gives like talking points, but you don't really hear a really cogent or reasonable argument for much of anything. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. No. Now, Danny's going to ask him the question again about events, happening for a purpose. Like all events happen for a purpose. So I'm kind of curious to see, like, is VEKL going to dodge that answer now, or like? So
have you seen this?
I watched No, I watched most of it before, but I didn't see the end of it. I don't think I watched from I think I saw maybe about at the 30-minute mark.
Event has a purpose, yes or no?
You can reject it, but
do you think every event has a purpose, VEKL?
Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, for example, that clearly shows, and there's several of them like this, where it clearly shows an example of God's sovereignty over several things that occur in the world. When Joseph says to his brothers, "You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good."
Completely pointless. I remember hearing this. This is completely pointless on his part.
What I think
does not justify the contradiction. You're just trying to double down on a contradiction. You haven't you haven't reasoned your way through the contradiction that you seem to be holding to based on what Danny's arguing, and yet now you just want to double down by asserting scripture. What, to seal in that shit? Go right ahead.
And what I was telling Jefferson earlier is that notice that none of the premises of my argument included God.
You may want to ask him if he knows what a premise is.
Well, that probably would have been a good question for him, actually.
Danny has admitted that he went in there too, because he heard VEKL saying some random stuff, and when he caught him saying like everything happens for a reason or everything happens for God's purpose or something like that, that was the deepity that he needed, and he went in after him.
I think most of us that kind of truck in these conversations, if we'd heard that, we'd have done the same. We'd have like stopped, turned, and like looked at whatever device we were listening to it with, and we just gone, oh, I gotta go after that shit.
I think what happened was he was saying really kind of bigoted stuff towards the psychology of atheists. He was kind of like the and when a Christian does that, then I wait, right? I wait for them to say something like this, and then I go in. Otherwise, I mostly leave them alone. A lot of but like when they start talking about, what their view about how motivated reasoners atheists are, or how they don't really do this or don't do that, there can't be moral, then I'm looking for something at that. You've triggered a thing, like you flipped on a switch.
Yeah. Do you know why VEKL has a problem with atheists?
I don't remember exactly.
Because we're not closeted. We're not out of the way. So he wouldn't talk about, he always talks about, I don't understand why these atheists, they don't believe in God. Like, why are they on here having these kind of discussions? And no matter how many times people tell him that shit, he will go around and make rounds on his Christian buddies channels saying, I don't understand why these atheists are fucking doing this. I don't understand why they... And then he'll turn around and then he'll talk shit about atheists when he thinks there aren't any atheists around, and then all of a sudden the conversations come, I don't understand why you're gonna have these fucking conversations to begin with. And it's like, as far as he's concerned, if nobody admitted to being an atheist and just basically did whatever, he'd be perfectly fine. He wouldn't care.
Yeah, but I mean that the way that he's asking that question is a way to already sort of give everyone short shrift, right? Like he's like, I don't even know why you'd be here, right? Because what he wants to do is reduce it down to, you're not really an atheist, you're just mad at God, or something
like that.
Right like that.
I'm going to say this, and then I have to go. Thanks for having me on, Jefferson. But what he's like one of these he's one of these Frank Turek people that does you're borrowing from Christianity, or with respect to right and wrong, you can't have morals, but. And so I figured out how to address some of that, and I wanted to share. I'm going to start saying that, you're borrowing from my worldview, because the idea is that there's a sense in which they want to follow God, so they think they should go to church and pray and stuff like that. That's just my moral theory. You should, some function between the good and what your goals are, right? So I don't know. I just wanted to, when he says you're borrowing from the Christian worldview about right and wrong, I'm just going to say, well, you're borrowing from my worldview, actually.
I actually think that you could connect this argument that you gave to VEKL to kind of a negative argument, if you were to combine it to another one where you kind of set it up as a Christian, don't you believe that you're rational? Like God is rational. Rationality is something, set up one of those things where rationality is something that's within the mind of God. If you're a Christian, then you should only believe things that are rational, because those things comport with the mind of God. The contradictions are not rational, and then do this. and then be like, now, do you feel like your beliefs are conforming to the mind and will of God?
Yeah, you have to. I think you do have to do that for a lot of these people. You have to set up why a contradiction is a no-go.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that VEKL had initially been teasing, but once he starts wrapping himself in the biggest Bible cape that he can find, just God's mysterious, and I can show you where it says in the Book of Spells why this is thus and so. Neat. All right, why don't you go gasp someplace else? Oh, diva.
All right, guys, I gotta go. Thanks for having me on. Enjoy the rest of the video.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Danny. Take it easy. Have a good night.
Thanks for the entertainment.
It's good to have his input.
Yeah, I was sitting here. I was listening to them. Because when Nicola and Danny, they don't get along. So it was. I could kind of tell. I think Nicola was kind of watching his rhetoric. But when we were reviewing this and everything, we didn't know that motivation, like because he had heard. Well, yeah, because we didn't know that Danny had gone in there just because he heard him say something this stupid. He's okay, this might be interesting to attack to see where it can go. And yeah, this is what happens.
I'm going to play a couple more minutes of this, and I'm going to jump into the other one before it gets too much later.
Okay.
These events were going to happen before they did. He obviously either ordained it or allowed it to occur.
Okay.
And in the end, ultimately, it is for a purpose. Okay.
Okay, so every event has a purpose.
Everything has a purpose.
Everything has a purpose based off of what I see in Scripture. Yes.
All right. So if every event has a purpose, that means every event should happen. Yes.
Sure.
Okay. If every event should happen, that means there are no events that should not happen. Correct?
That's what I think he's confused about.
All I'm saying is that if God
He's
ordains it or permits it, obviously it happened or it's going to happen. Okay? That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. Do you think that if every event should happen, that there are no events that shouldn't happen? That follows, right?
Wait, say that one more time.
If you believe that every event should happen, live in that belief, you're also committed to the fact that means that there are no events that should not happen.
I'll say it this way. Every event that should happen under God's watch will happen because God decrees it to occur.
That's not the premise I'm just asking about. I'm asking about...
That's
not the question is whether you think...
Okay, I'm gonna stop this one there because they're going right back into that same cycle, and VEKL can't wrap his head around it. But yeah, for anybody that's looking for for me, this was I'm gonna finish. I'll probably end up watching the rest. Maybe I did watch the whole thing. When I watched this, I think I was having lunch, and I was just sitting there eating lunch with a big smile on my face because I've started to get into conversations like this with VEKL, but I've never kept him on his back foot so consistently like Danny has with this one. This was really a real treat for me to watch. It's just the Schadenfreude was really it was a warming sensation. So
you saw him. It's like watching somebody dodge but getting hit in the face every time they dodge.
Yeah. It's you just it's like
you keep running into that glaring contradiction and you don't fucking see it.
It's like the episode of The Simpsons with the where they go into witness protection because Sideshow Bob comes out of prison. It was like the Cape Fear one, and the FBI guys are trying to go through their alternate. They're going to change his name to the Thompsons, and they're trying to tell Homer now when I say your name, you say, hello, Mr. Thompson, and Homer just looks at him blankly. And they keep going through this routine. You're like, now when I say your name, hello, Mr. Thompson, and step on your foot, you respond by saying hello, Mr. Thompson, step. And Homer, after hours, turns, I think he's talking to you. That's what VEKL's pulling here.
Yeah.
If anybody catches that ancient Simpsons reference,
that's when they go. That's when they go into witness protection because Sideshow Bob's after him. It's after Bart.
Yeah, it's actually got the rakes gag in it, which is hilarious. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to get into this one. This one is kind of it's a mix of different ones, but it's sort of JRobin and Darth Dawkins dealing with Brenda and JRobin. Every time I see his avatar, when I call him Red Robin, JRobin and Darth Dawkins love to misgender Brenda. Brenda is trans. Pronouns are she and her. JRobin and Darth Dawkins, I would say they don't give a shit, but they actually do. They go out of their way to misgender her. But they get into some of their usual stuff here. So this I'll play this a little bit, and if this gets kind of too repetitive or too boring, I'm just going to turn it up, and I'm going to kind of see what happens at the beginning. So here we go.
If you affirm any
don't you think it's about time that atheists change the title for themselves? Because that word atheist is a compound of two words, a denial of theism,
It's without.
Always going on about somebody
not denial, without.
I love this guy's accent because like he's like, I think you non-believers need to change it. Like like this is the accent that you want to hear from somebody who's going to sell you like a farmhouse cheese or a cup a bottle of scrumpy. He's got that just sing-songy like I work on the grounds at Downton Abbey.
This sounds like that guy sounds like he has an actual like a London accent.
No, it sounds like it's from the north. Like he's Lake Country or something like that. Is my guess, but I'm probably messing that up. But my guess is he's up Yorkshire way. So, yep.
Manchester.
Yorkshire. Yeah. Damn. I called it. Hopefully, Lucky Seven Wolf in there knows that. Yeah. He definitely sounds like he's from Yorkshire.
He exists.
I remember
they're almost admitting to God by calling themselves atheists, aren't they? Because
A is just it's.
Ryan's saying Liverpool. No, if he's from Liverpool, then he just sounds like that. Think Beatles. Yeah, that's my problem though. I don't listen. I don't like the Beatles. I'm weird like that. But this guy's.
Oh, he's right.
But I don't know. Yeah.
Ryan, well, I've heard him. If you ever like Paul McCartney, like
he says, think Beatles. Ryan, if you're from the UK, I'm gonna defer to you. But Lucky is saying he is from Yorkshire. Maybe he's actually told people he's from Yorkshire. My guess was Yorkshire. So Clockwork's just throwing Welsh. Don't confuse the situation any more than it needs to be. He's not Welsh. No, yeah, and that's not what Welsh sounds like.
It's just a prefix that's used to refer to the negation of something.
Negation of, isn't it?
Right.
Well, Jeffrey J. Lauder is the founder of one of the largest internet sites for atheists, of Internet Infidels. He wrote in one of his own blogs,
Internet Infidels?
Atheists continue to shoot themselves in their foot because they don't have a unified definition of atheism. All right? So this is the problem.
You guys don't have a unified fucking doctrine for Christianity.
Yeah.
Default.
This is such a weird thing to do. Like, I don't think Internet Infidels, that website's even around anymore. And the idea that like, oh well, you guys don't have your own unified term for it. That's because in philosophy, there are a couple different ways of approaching philosophy. But Darth doesn't admit to that, right? Darth will. This is one of the few times where Darth will refer to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and then gets it wrong. Like, well, the Stanford Encyclopedia says this is what atheism is, and so therefore that's what it is. Like, no. That's not all that it is. Like he doesn't even get the definite. Like no, it means just this. Like yeah, that's not all they say in that particular article. And if you read the entire article, you'd know that. And if you go to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, you do get a better breakdown of the different definitions and usages of the term, and it's not that cut and dry. So.
Works, dictionaries, encyclopedias, including dictionaries and encyclopedias of philosophy. They are near unanimous in that atheism is to be best defined as the denial of the existence of God, as opposed to the suspension of a judgment about God. Because if
he does this a lot. That's basically implying it's true, but you're lying to yourself.
Kind of, yeah.
That's how whenever I hear Darth use the word denial, I don't think that's as in no to this proposition. I take that as in your arm is broken, but you're saying he's saying it's denial in the classical sense. You're denying something to be true. That's what denial normally means. It's a refusal. It's normally a refusal to accept something as fact.
Which is why he sticks to that word, and he gets squirrely about it too when somebody tries to hold him to that, because he'll try to say that that's what he thinks an implicit denial is. So these agnostics, what you're doing is you're actually denying it. You know that there's a God. You're pretending like you don't know one way or the other. That's just
you're always lying.
Yeah. So at the end, you're always lying. I'm the one telling the truth. Like it's not how anything works, Darth.
If we define it the latter, then
it is how his mind works. So that's technically false stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of zero-sum fallacies going on in there.
Yeah,
so,
the concept works, at least in his brain. In reality,
yeah. Well, and it would be better if he actually just presented it that way. That's one of the things that I don't like about this, because he'll bitch and moan about things like psychological terms and philosophy, but then he'll say things that are flat out trash theology and disguise them as if they're just philosophical precepts or some kind of oh, don't you know philosophers have agreed on this for hundreds of years? Like, no, they haven't.
Oh, when he tries to make things into axioms on the fly.
No. He'll like the idea of it's the denial of God, right? He has theological baggage when he says that. You and I pick up on it because I think anybody with a church background kind of picks up on that automatically, which makes this guy even more annoying. But when he brings that in there, and then he just tries to, no, don't you understand? Philosophers have no problems understanding. Like a philosopher would have a problem with Darth smuggling in that kind of loaded theological language into a philosophical discussion.
Yeah.
And he tries to pretend that that's not what he's doing, or if it is what he's doing, no philosopher would have any issue with him. Like, yeah, they would, and they have, because he has had conversations with actual philosophers, PhDs, and lost to them. Like, and I don't think that you can win or lose at a discussion. Until I saw Darth Dawkins have discussions with them, you can lose a conversation. It's the damnedest thing. Christopher Matter, getting Darth on psychological topics is the most fun. Yeah, psychological topics really triggers him.
It's that simple. There's a reason why they want to define atheism as simply a psychological state by which they have a mere
oh my God.
positive belief, thereby insulating.
There are so many problems with that, but I'm not going to bog it down.
It's really simple. There's only one word in the English language that designates the denial of the existence of God, and that is atheism. Okay, it's that simple. But they want to play these little psychological games, which is embarrassing for them because this is fit for teenagers.
So, Jay, I have a question for you, if that's okay.
This is weird.
During your discussion with Brenda, she said,
stop right there. That was not a she. Yeah. That was a he. He is a man. Hold on a second. That is a man.
No, I agree with you, though. I agree with you.
I'm just saying.
I totally agree with you.
Who is pretending?
I just don't want. Yeah, I totally agree with. I just don't want the meaningless and nonsensical confrontation. So for me, I don't care, man. If they want to be called she,
you're free to call them whatever you want. But
for me, is he Darth? Because it kind of sounded like the way you interjected. It kind of sounded like he shouldn't be free to just call Brenda whatever he wants or whatever Brenda wants. It sounds like he better start calling Brenda what you want.
Yeah, if he was holding to that, he wouldn't have piped in.
Yeah. Good Lord. Take it easy, Scrooge.
Yeah, if he was holding to the idea, oh well, people can just refer to him whatever way, and they don't have a problem with it. I might have issue with it, but that's there. No, he wouldn't have said anything, but he did, which means he doesn't think anybody should be calling Brenda as she.
Yeah, shit. Let me get this transphobia out of my lungs, damn it. Yeah, he's got to make sure that everybody knows. Anyone in earshot has to know that Darth finds this objectionable, and I'm going to plant my flag here, damn it. Like, yeah, we know you've had trouble keeping up with the times.
Weren't there some people that were like spreading like the rumor, like the reason that Darth had such a hard on for transgenders is because he got trapped by a trap?
I've heard a bunch of different rumors. I don't know. I don't know how many of them are.
Maybe that's just a theory, or maybe that's just somebody hoping that that's what happened. I know why Darth is so angry at trans people. Why is that? Because he fucked one.
The idea that like he's had like some kind of relationships like this, there's been tons of different things, like, oh, he's closeted. No, he was actually out. He's had affairs with multiple partners of multiple orientations. He's just self-loathing. All that stuff's been going around for years. I don't know if any of that's true. What I do know though is that the disdain in his voice anytime he talks to an individual that identifies as anything other than just cisgender and straight, that the level of disdain and the amount of derision that he seems to have, he feels compelled to direct at them, really indicates that he's got some problems.
Yeah, a little bit of psychopathy there.
Yeah, there's something. Yeah, there's something there. Either just, and it could just be intense backward, ignorance. There's nothing wrong with that. Good old stupidity can justify a lot of things, but
You mean
Anyway,
like
here we go.
to dress like a girl? What kind of fucking retard are you?
Yeah, easy now. Easy.
Well, I had to
that
tell
was
it.
not a she.
Yeah,
well, for me, they're just delusional folks, man. And but anyway, Jay, during that conversation, that person said that atheism is the default position. I think I misheard you, but it felt like you were saying that you could that you could concede that, but that you wouldn't. Am I correct?
No, this is the thing that Brendan. Brendan was bringing up that as a, it was just one of his cliches that he just likes to throw around, and that wasn't relevant to what the question was, because I was asking him whether or not he could substantiate the falsity of God, and then he wanted to say that atheism was the denial or the default position. I was telling him that even if I conceded that to him, it's irrelevant to the point as to whether or not the falsity of God could actually be rationally defended.
Yeah, that's not going to work for them, because the reason why they've got to push against that is because it is, what Darth is saying requires that you do know, not that you just believe, that you know that God exists. And that you're denying it anyway. That's why they have to push back against that whole idea that atheism is kind of like the position of being uninitiated, right? And you're first being initiated to a particular proposition, and that is a God exists or gods exist. Well, the best thing to do fundamentally is to ask, well, what is it that you're actually proposing? Define this thing, right? And then go from there. And then you make a judgment. You will either mentally accept that, or you will mentally not accept that. Just depends on how convincing this person is when it comes to introducing you to something that that's completely new to you. And they cannot have that. They cannot.
Well, no, because they're God's revelational. You already know about it.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, which is lazy and silly, but they can always cling to that one. So
I don't believe nor affirm. I don't affirm the proposition that atheism is the default position. I was just saying that it's irrelevant to the point I was talking about.
Brendan is a notorious troll. He's somebody who will lie, who will obfuscate, who will prevaricate, right? He said, I'm justified in my doxastic attitude that God doesn't exist. Well, based upon what? I mean, this is just verbal mumbo jumbo. He knows what he's doing. This is a guy who on more than a dozen occasions would debate against me, saying that scientists within the realm of science do not presuppose that,
as opposed to scientists within the realm of the dark arts. I don't know why Darth had to clarify that, but
regular nature.
Well, he does hold to sorcery. He believes smoking dope is sorcery.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and he also believes that syncopated rhythms will summon the devil.
Yep, exactly. He's got his. I'm surprised it wouldn't surprise me if he sees something, he yells black spot and spits 3 times and then spins around.
Mm-hmm.
Lie.
Holds his breath when driving past fucking.
This is the kind of individual
cemeteries
that we're talking about. That he will lie.
Picks up his feet before going over railroad tracks.
He's always throwing salt over his one shoulder.
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't help it. They were just coming to me. Just one right after another. All right, gotta stop.
Yeah, well, agreed. I just found it weird that because I was listening for almost 20 minutes, and Jay sounds like someone who knows his stuff. So it felt weird for him to say, at least to my ears, it sounded like he could concede that atheism is the default position, but he just told us and that that wasn't the point. That wasn't
majority of atheists. The vast majority of
now I want to clarify something.
I'm pretty sure that Big has already told them that he's a Muslim. So this is one of these situations where Darth is so triggered by the topic of transgenders or homosexuality or whatever that he's ignoring the fact that he has a Muslim there with him that he could tear into. But because he knows that, for the most part within the Muslim faith, the LGBT community is not really tolerated either, he's got an ally. So that's how cheap he's being.
Yeah, but I wanted to clarify too. I don't necessarily agree to that whole idea that atheism is the default position, because technically that's a proposition. So the atheism in itself, the way it's defined, is a proposition that a god or gods do not exist. There's like theism, and theism is the antithetical to that one. It's the proposition that a god or gods do exist. Right. Once you've heard those, you take a position on one of those, depending on whether or not you actually understand what is actually being entailed by that word God and gods. That's it.
Social networks, not all, but the majority of them, to one degree or another, have the mental demeanor of defiant teenagers. They are unruly, they're deceptive, they're deceitful, they're argumentative, they employ bickering rather than an adult.
So yelling someone down and letting them know that this is how you should refer to this particular person in terms of pronouns and a misgendered name, when they tell you that they don't, and then tell them, oh, I don't care what you call them, I'm telling you what I think. Like, that's not
I thought he said he didn't
behavior.
I thought he said he didn't care what people referred to him as.
That's what Big said.
Yeah, but I thought he agreed with that.
Darth tried to tell him, I don't care what you call him. Like, no, I'm pretty sure you did. And that kind of attitude, that seems pretty immature. So the fact that he's like, well, these obstreperous and pushy and nosy, like he's the guy that, after they take the mask off, he's the old guy that was trying to defraud the amusement park or something. At the end of at Scooby Doo, And he's like, I would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for you mentally.
You damn dirty kids.
He's constantly shaking. He's got that fist like up in the air. Like, you damn kids. Like, and if they're not kids, it's just like, well, they're atheists and they're like kids. Get off my lawn, says Darth to no one, because he doesn't own a lawn. His mom does. Sorry.
Don't make Darth. Don't make me break out the Saran wrap and the fucking sporks.
Christopher Monty's like, are we going to start talking about shitty atheist positions? Please, let's do this. Well, there's plenty of shitty atheist positions, but I don't think in this particular video they ever get that far. Although Brenda does show up. They do. Brenda shows up, and I don't know if they try. I don't know if they.
Jeff's not implying that Brenda is necessarily a shitty atheist.
No, or holds a shitty position. But I think they try to corner if this is the one I think it is. I think they try to corner her in one.
But now, to be fair though, if Brenda does kind of hold to this idea that it's atheism is the default position, that's not a really like. In my opinion, when they say atheism is the default position is uninitiated.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think
without disagreeing with that position, just outright. Fundamentally, the position is your mental state when it comes to this stuff is uninitiated. Once you get introduced to that proposition and what that proposition entails, that's you no longer have the ability to say, well, I'm still uninitiated.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's where some of these guys get wrong, because they're like, oh, like in a lot of cases, culturally, a lot of people are aware of certain aspects of Christianity. We are initiated at least into some aspects of the God concept. But where these guys end up going, Darth especially, he'll help himself into the conversation to these just kind of, frankly, loopy theological concepts. Like, just because the average person in the United States has heard of Noah, Moses, and Jesus Christ does not mean they know what pneumatology is, or soteriology, right? They probably never heard that term, and a lot of Christians haven't either. So
yeah, that's why if they say, well, when we say the default position, what we're referring to is we don't just go believing things just because we're told that they are the case. Then I would say, then that's fine. If you want to say that's the default position, okay, you can do that, because fundamentally they're just you've been initiated, but the position is to be skeptical, not to just accept any old claim without good reason to believe it to be the case.
I mean, maybe to a point, but there is a certain amount of like social and cultural indoctrination. I mean, the reason that I didn't doubt the existence of God for so long is because as a kid, every adult that we were surrounded by just took the existence of God. They believed in God. So I took the fact that God existed for granted. Every adult that was part of our, formative years growing up believed God was real. So it must be real. They must be these people can't all be liars and crazy, right? Yeah. And that was before I even really learned to rationalize that way.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally that's basically what the Bible is significant of. When you read the Old Testament and New Testament, there's no demonstration of the deity, because they're kind of like what you just said. You and I were. We just. Yeah, it's just accepted.
Yeah, it's just taken to be like, oh yeah,
taken for granted. Oh, there's this invisible force called God, and you pray to him and you worship him, and as long as you're good, you'll go to heaven or whatever. Yeah, that's perfectly acceptable. And you just kind of go along with it, and that's basically how a lot of cultures work. So, especially when you don't have the internet, especially if you don't have the internet.
Interaction. When they're asked straightforward questions to bring clarity to the dispute, They just obfuscate and they bicker. This is what they do, right?
This is what
I agree with you.
This is what they do. Like, he needs that tattooed on his forehead.
And they don't always deploy it all the time. They only deploy this when they feel that it is needed. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I've had atheists come to me and say, I don't know anything about. I'm a Muslim, yeah. So they come to me, they were like, I don't know anything about Islam, and then we'll talk about the problem of evil and all that, and then towards the end of the discussion, they'd be like, well, this is not what Muslims believe. And I'm like, bro, you just told me you know nothing about Islam, and now you're telling me that my beliefs are wrong. Well, you choose. You either say you know what Islam is, and then I'm wrong, or you say I don't know anything. You can't say you don't know nothing, and at the end of the discussion say, I don't know anything about Islam, but I know you're wrong. Like how?
If they came into a conversation with you and you're a Muslim and they said at the beginning of the conversation they don't know anything about Islam, and then after having a conversation with you they conclude that a lot of your viewpoints and conclusions are wrong, they're not saying they don't know anything about Islam, they're saying you're wrong. Like, they can do that. That's not necessarily a contradiction. They've just listened to a Muslim lay out some things and some opinions, and then say, like, if this guy's point was like, well, they tell me that they don't know anything about Islam, and then we get into a conversation about it, and I say, well, this is what I believe in my, in Islam, and then they correct me on some doctrine. But that's maybe that's where he was going, and if I was going to be charitable, maybe, but the way he was talking about that is like, yeah, I tell them what Islam is, and they tell me that I'm wrong. Yeah, okay, they didn't know what it was, and then you start laying out like, oh, here's what the Quran says, and here's what the stance is on this and on that, and they're just like, yeah, nope, hard pass. Like, oh, how dare you? Like, yeah, well, yeah, that's going to happen. People are going to turn you down. Can't close every sale.
Yeah. Does Brenda actually come into this?
I don't know if she. Let me take a look, because I don't know how much longer I can stand with this one. Does she show up? I think he goes into a different video. Yeah. I'm not sure. I think she does show up in this one. They cut over to another one. I think there's 3 spliced into this one.
Oh, okay.
Most of like most of this one is a conversation between her and JRobin. And then I think the last quarter of it is just JRobin talking shit about her behind her back.
Yes, yeah, they're very.
Somebody just dropped a new JRobin video.
What's up?
Somebody just dropped a new JRobin video. I think the Club Debates did channel. I think they just dropped a new video about JRobin.
Most of them.
Yeah, this is why it is so difficult to deal with them. Even some of the professional atheists.
Yeah, we're so hard to deal with, aren't we?
Dialoguing with in AMAs on Discord, and I've talked with about, I think, 7 or 8 of them.
I'm trying to break through those lies, trying to break through that barrier.
Questions that they are deeply uncomfortable in answering, they just want to get rid of you, which is what they did to me, right? Even the best of them, like Graham Oppie, he did not want to be questioned when he said that naturalism is a better explanation, right? And when I questioned him about its coherence, he got rid of me, not because I was being unruly or bickering.
I don't think that's how that happened.
They just want to deploy their.
I don't recall that being how that went. Graham Oppie didn't get rid of him. I believe that conversation was being hosted by Canadian Catholic, and Canadian Catholic binned him because Darth wouldn't. Had probably started over talking Graham Oppie.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that Darth kept doing was that Oppie was trying to lay out this sort of like commitments, logical, commitment, some kind of belief commitments that you're making when you're trying to form one of these beliefs. And Darth basically blew that off and then was like, well, how do you justify your naturalism without a God kind of thing? The usual kind of runaround. And Oppie's like, you wouldn't do that. So, but yeah. it didn't get productive because he went full tilt diva, and Canadian Catholic had to jerk his leash. So
little verbal games, and they don't want their little verbal games to be exposed. And with that said, if any unbelievers want to come up and challenge the Christian worldview, you're free to come up. We maintain that the Christian worldview is objectively provable, but that being that it is objectively,
got to speak for yourself and JRobin there, and maybe B, Captain Yorkshire. Big is not a Christian, Darth. I think it's interesting. We hold to the Christian worldview, like the man whose avatar is to the neck, that's next to yours, Darth, is not a Christian. So
Yeah.
Like, I guess Darth is just in the habit of using the royal we. He can't help it.
Mm-hmm.
Provable does not mean that the would-be autonomous individual is going to be persuaded, because you can only be persuaded if and only if you relinquish your pseudo belief in your mental autonomy, that your mind can simply exist without any metaphysical reference whatsoever to God, right? So Christian,
without a metaphysical reference to God, that the reference to it is not necessary. That doesn't make any sense.
Why would that be a precondition for autonomy? Autonomy is just basically is just self-governing. How is governing mental self-governorship have anything to do with referencing jack shit?
Well, and this is the thing that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, his appeal is largely a rational one. You need to reach the rational conclusion that Darth has reached, right? Using your reason. He's appealing to someone's reason and then telling them their reason isn't theirs to use to reason to the right conclusion.
Oh, yeah. True.
Like, people have pointed this out to him before, and it's like, look, he's got one foot in Calvinism and another foot in something that's cockeyed, right? Like, well, actually, Calvinism's pretty cockeyed on its own, so that's not entirely, But I don't know why he does this, but he doesn't understand the entailments of a lot of the theological positions that he takes.
Does he have a problem with Descartes' I think, therefore I am?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But he doesn't understand that, like, I mean, even in some of the newer philosophical literature on it, they talk about how Descartes probably meant that more of in an intuitive sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Darth doesn't care about any of that. That he just thinks that, oh, that's a claim that no one can back up, because that kind of kind of Cartesian starting off point is something that T-Jump uses, and he and Tom Jump have gone round and round and round on that.
Wait, that doesn't conflict, but that's stupid. That doesn't actually conflict with his autonomous, with God being the necessary precondition for that. Right. He does realize that, doesn't he?
No.
Just because you think that and you say, I think, therefore I am, and this is meant more of an intuitive sense, there's nothing to say that fundamentally it can't be that's because of a God.
Actually, like, if he was consistent in this kind of approach, he could just say that intuitive thing is revelation. The fact that we can intuit that in our subjective experience, are part of our consciousness, that is God's revelation that he is real. We wouldn't have that without God.
Yeah.
And many Christians could just make that kind of, would make an appeal to that kind of thing. What Darth's trying to do is just like try to get, like, no, he's trying to make somebody extra servile. He wants to knock a person off their feet. Like, you don't have any autonomy of your own. You can't trust your own thinking. You need to get so he can't like, he's taken some of Van Til's precept, and then some of Van Til's precept is loaded with this kind of militaristic weaponizing language that's also not very clear and a lot of times kind of contradictory, at least implicitly. Bonson took it and made it even more obnoxious, and then other people ran with it, like Darth. And Darth has taken it and has used it in a way where precept works better if you kind of approach people like you're a Zen master. Like, the argument is already won. Cy ten Bruggencate fucked this up, right? Because he would walk in haughty. He would tell people, well, just by coming to this debate, you've already acknowledged that I've won, right? That's not how you're supposed to sell precept. That's not how you're supposed to do it. He would do he'd have his laptop and it would have the ichthys, the Christian fish, but it would have a shark fin and all that kind of shit. Like, his whole attitude behind presenting that stuff was completely wrong. That's not how precept doesn't work that way. It immediately galvanizes people against you and Christianity if you say that that's biblical. If you come at it with, like, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, and you have your subjective thoughts and you have your doubts and all this other kind of, but the reason that you have all that stuff ultimately at the end of the day is because God created it. God has made it that way, right? That's sort of the whole point of the precept thing. They start from the assumption that everything comes from God, right? They're supposed to get some kind of certainty from that, a sense of surety, a sense of peace from that philosophy, and none of them do. It produces this guy. It produces Darth and
that's because there's nothing. That's because you're appealing to something that you haven't rationalized the merit to what it is.
Right, but they don't need to. They can just keep them simple. They can just keep the things simple. They can just be like, oh, okay, so what you're saying is subjective experience is entirely dependent on the fact that God made it. Yeah, sure. Okay. right? And then when they're asked like, well, how do you know that? All they can do is like, well, look, if we look at like the way philosophy works, there's just these certain axioms and these presuppositions that we all make, right? And the point of precept is to basically say, so what you're saying is like, hey, we have to make those precepts. We don't know where they come from, but this is just sort of the way our minds work, and this is how things just kind of have to be, right? You can try to deny the laws of logic, but in trying to deny them, you end up affirming them. So, it's impossible to do that. We think that process, the reality, that the very, the real inevitability of that is something given to us by God. That's all precept is based on. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And for some reason, these guys keep fucking it up. Like, it doesn't help me. It doesn't convince me anymore, right? They're basically saying like, whatever these unexplained phenomenon are about human thinkings, the limits of human epistemology, it's God, right? It's just basically pushing God to the frontiers of man's thinking and saying whatever's mysterious is God. Humans have been doing that ever since we looked at the sky and wondered what the stars were, right? It's just a basic tendency. To me, it's no deeper than that. And that's why these guys they're not comfortable just staying there. They want to go another step, and Darth, because he has that need to punish people, has turned this thing into some kind of rhetorical torture room, and that's why he keeps screwing up.
Yeah.
So, and actually, with that, I don't know that there's too much more in this one to hit. I know Brenda does show up, and then she and JRobin get into it a little bit, and it might actually be part of a video that I saw before. I don't know how recent this one is, because Darth leaves, and then Brenda shows up here, and then they kind of go at it. But yeah, actually, I think I'm going to wrap it up here because I just realized it's 2:15, so I need to wrap this up and go to bed. Sorry to cut this one close, people. The links for these videos are in the description, so if you're interested in watching these ones, check them out. Apologies for going long with the VEKL and Danny one, but I was getting a kick out of that one again. And special thanks to Danny for joining us and talking about this. Special thanks to Mr. J for jumping in too.
Yep.
Special thanks to Christopher Mowdy. He joined. Longtime fan. I've been watching him on and off for many years now on YouTube. So
I don't think I've ever talked to Mowdy.
Yeah. I've talked to him a couple of times. What he does is like Sunday streams. I was in there actually last weekend for a little bit, and me and Simus Funk and Fabio and a few others, and Gus was there actually. Kind of made a wreck of it. So I think he might have had a private because we were being naughty. We were telling bad jokes and shit. So
okay, cool.
Yeah, he might have privated that one. But anyway, yeah. Thank you everybody for showing up. Thanks to everybody in the live chat. Like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff, or don't. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. I will be coming back Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will be doing part 3 of my conversation with Michael from the Canadian Atheist. We're going to keep doing that. Hopefully, we're going to make some more progress in that video. At the rate that we're going, that might end up turning into like a 5-parter. So we'll see. Yeah, I guess with that, we'll get out of here. Take it easy, everybody. See you later, everybody. Good night.